The flies were the first thing he noticed, hundreds of them, crawling over the horse's ribs like the world had already written him off. But Lemuel saw what no one else did. A flicker of the past, a ghost he'd sworn to forget. The auction barn reeked of dust and defeat, a place where broken things came to die, and the crowd's laughter felt like nails hammering into a coffin. The horse stood trembling, his coat dull as ash, eyes hollowed by a sorrow so deep it could drown a man. $50, Lemuel rasped, and the room fell silent. No one understood why a man would buy a skeleton. But Lemuel had spent years running from memories, and this horse, this ghost, was dragging him back. He loaded the animal into his trailer with hands that hadn't touched a living thing in over a decade. The horse's breath hitched with every step, bones rattling like dry sticks in the wind. Lemuel didn't speak, didn't soothe, he just drove, the empty roads stretching ahead like the unspoken years between him and the fire, between him and her. Ince's face flickered in the rearview mirror, her laughter, her hands brushing a mare's mane. Her voice soft as she said, "They don't need saving, they need someone who sees them." The ranch appeared like a scar on the horizon, weathered and worn, its fields overgrown, its fences sagging. Ghosts stumbled into the paddock and froze, staring at the rotting blue bench Ince's had painted. Lemuel sat there now, the chipped wood biting into his palms, and wondered if the horse could smell the smoke still clinging to this place. Days bled into nights. Lemuel brought hay, water, silence. Ghost didn't eat, he just stood, swaying as if the ground might swallow him whole. But on the second evening, as the sun dipped low, the horse limped closer, not for food, not for comfort, but to press his bony shoulder against the fence. Lemuel's throat tightened. It was a small thing, a fragile bridge between two broken creatures, but it echoed a truth he'd buried long ago. You don't heal by hiding. By the week's end, Lemuel found himself in the tack shed, dust swirling in the slanted light. A sun-bleached photo slipped from a saddlebag, Ince grinning beside a chestnut mare with a blaze like lightning down her face. His pulse roared. The mare in the photo had the same crescent-shaped scar as Ghost, the same haunted tilt to her ears. Dahlia, Ince's favorite. The horse in his paddock wasn't just a stray, he was a thread pulled from the fabric of a life Lemuel thought had burned to nothing. And as he traced Ince's smile in the fading light, he realized this wasn't an ending, it was a reckoning. The barn light buzzed like a trapped wasp as Lemuel squinted at the laptop screen, its glow carving shadows into his face. Sunfire's Redemption. The name glared back at him, a ghost in digital ink. Ghost's bloodline, once legendary, now reduced to a footnote in a dead man's scam. Lemuel's fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling not from age but from the name beneath the registry. James Cutter, the man Ince had defended, the man who'd vanished after the fire, the man who'd sold Ghost to rot. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he paced the kitchen, floorboards creaking like old regrets. Dawn found him at the county clerk's office, clutching a folder thicker than guilt. The clerk's voice dropped as she handed it over. "He's gone," she said, nodding at James's photo. But his lies aren't. Lemuel's hands turned the pages slowly, each document a shard of glass, bank records, forged pedigrees. And then her handwriting. A letter Ince never sent, words that cut deeper than the fire ever had. "I never told Lemuel, it was the only way to keep the ranch." The room tilted. Dahlia's full, the deal with James. Her silence. Outside, Ghost stood motionless in the paddock, head bowed as if carrying the weight of Lemuel's shattered trust. Lemuel stumbled toward him, letter crumpled in his fist. "You knew, didn't you?" he whispered, voice cracking. The horse lifted his gaze, eyes reflecting a truth Lemuel couldn't outrun. Ince had chosen to bear this alone, to protect him. The anger dissolved, leaving only a hollow ache. He sank to his knees, forehead pressed against Ghost's scarred leg, the same one Dahlia had torn on barbed wire years ago. "We're both fools," he muttered, chasing ghosts, days blurred. Lemuel began mending fences, literal ones, splintered wood beneath his palms, and invisible ones etched into his heart. Ghost followed him, now a shadow with warmth, his coat shedding grime to reveal hints of burnished copper. One morning, as Lemuel oiled Ince's old saddle, Ghost nudged his shoulder, breath hot and steady. "You're not her," Lemuel said, voice rough. "But you're here." The horse nudged again, insistent, until Lemuel's calloused hand rested on his neck. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. The call came on a Tuesday. A rescue registry, an evaluation. Lemuel stood frozen, phone pressed to his ear, staring at Ghost grazing beneath the windmill. "He's eligible for recognition," the woman said. Recognition, or a reminder of all he'd failed to save. That night, he drove to Walter's. The old trainer answered the door with a grunt, eyes narrowing at Ghost in the trailer. "Took you long enough," Walter said, spatula in hand, as if they'd spoken yesterday instead of a decade ago. "They worked at dawn." Walter's voice a low rumble. "Let him choose," he said, as Ghost circled the paddock, ears flicking at the wind. Lemuel unclenched his fists. "No commands, no demands, just space." Ghost's steps grew bolder, hooves crunching gravel with a rhythm that mirrored Lemuel's heartbeat. But progress, like healing, was fragile. A storm cracked the sky weeks later, thunder shaking the ranch. Ghost panicked, re-injuring his leg, and Lemuel found him thrashing in the mud. "Stop," he begged, arms locking around the horse's quivering neck. "You don't owe anyone this." But Ghost staggered upright, nostrils flaring, defiance burning through the pain. The morning of the evaluation, Lemuel clipped a lead to Ghost's halter. The horse exhaled, warm breath fogging the air, and leaned into Lemuel's touch. "Just you and me," Lemuel said, more prayer than promise. The fairgrounds swarmed with strangers, their stares like needles. Ghost stepped into the ring, head high, scars gleaming under the sun. Murmurs rippled, Sunfire's redemption. But Lemuel kept his eyes on the horse. Ghost moved stiffly at first, then smoother, each stride a silent roar. "I'm here. I'm alive." A woman called Inza's name. Lemuel froze. She said that foal would change everything, the stranger said. Ghost halted, ears pivoting, as if waiting for Lemuel to finally speak the truth aloud. He didn't, not yet. But as they left the ring, Ghost's muzzle brushed his shoulder, and for the first time in 12 years, Lemuel didn't flinch from the touch. The fairground buzzed with judgmental whispers, but Ghost stood calm, his breath steady against Lemuel's palm. The evaluation ring felt like a courtroom, strangers scribbling notes, eyes dissecting every scar. Ghost stepped forward, his limp barely visible now, head high as if daring the world to underestimate him again. Lemuel's voice stayed low, guiding him not with commands, but with nods, their rhythm forged in months of silent understanding. Ghost's hooves struck the dirt in time with Lemuel's heartbeat, each circle around the ring a quiet rebellion against every hand that had failed him. Then the woman spoke, her voice slicing through the noise like a blade through fog. "Inz believed in second chances," she said, stepping closer. Her face was lined with stories Lemuel didn't know, but her eyes held the same warmth. "Inz's once did." Ghost paused, ears swiveling, as if recognizing the name. Lemuel's throat closed. He hadn't spoken her name aloud in years. "Not since the memorial. She told me that horse would change someone's life," the woman added, nodding at Ghost. "Guess she was right." The words hung in the air, fragile and bright, and for a moment, Lemuel swore he smelled wildflowers, Inz's favorite. They left the ring without ribbons or applause, but as they passed the crowd, a man tipped his hat. A woman wiped her eyes. Ghost's head bobbed gently, as if bowing to an audience only he could see. Lemuel didn't realize he was smiling until his cheeks ached. Back at the ranch, the nights grew softer. Lemuel began leaving the porch light on, a small beacon against the dark. One evening, a truck rumbled up the gravel drive, a nervous man and his daughter, her eyes red-rimmed and distant. "Heard you taking strays," the man said, nodding at Ghost. The girl stared at the ground until Ghost ambled over, nudging her shoulder with his muzzle. She froze, then buried her face in his neck, shoulders shaking. Lemuel turned away, throat tight. "He's not mine to give," he said finally, "but you can visit." The girl returned every Sunday, her laughter threading through the paddock like new grass after a long winter. Lemuel found himself at Inz's grave. One misty dawn, Ghost grazing nearby. The headstone was mossy, the dates faded, but her name still sharp. "You should have told me," he murmured, tracing the letters. "But I should have listened." Ghost wandered over, lipping at Lemuel's sleeve, insistent. The horse's coat glowed in the weak light, scars now just part of the map that made him. Lemuel laid a hand on his flank. "We're both still here," he said. Not a triumph, but a fact. Spring arrived with a rush of green, the ranch humming with birdsong and the creak of repaired fences. Lemuel hung Inz's letter in a frame by the window, sunlight bleaching the ink but not the truth. Ghost roamed the pasture with two new arrivals, a swayback mare and a skittish pony, guiding them to the trough like a weathered sentinel. One evening, as fireflies blinked awake, Lemuel sat on the porch with Walter, sipping bitter coffee. "You gonna keep this up?" Walter grunted, watching the girl brush Ghost's mane. Lemuel shrugged. "Seems they need a place." Walter snorted. "They ain't the only ones." The stars were out when the girl left, hugging Lemuel goodbye. First, Ghost lingered by the fence, watching the horizon. Lemuel joined him, resting a hand on his withers. The horse exhaled, long and deep, his breath warm in the cooling air. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote yipped, but the sound didn't startle them. They stood there, two shadows under a sky, thick with constellations, no longer chasing ghosts but walking beside them. The wild flowers came first, carpets of gold and violet spilling across the fields, as if the earth itself had decided to forgive. Ghost moved through them like a king, his chestnut coat gleaming, scars now silver threads in sunlight. Lemuel watched from the porch, coffee in hand, as the girl, Mira, her name was, led the sway-backed mare through the pasture. Her laughter tangled with the wind, a sound so bright it could have cut glass. Ghost trotted beside them, head high, his limp gone, his shadow no longer a specter, but a promise. The ranch had become a quiet legend. Strangers arrived weekly, a man with a three-legged dog, a woman cradling a blind goat, a teenager clutching a parakeet in a shoebox. Lemuel never turned them away. He built extra stalls, patched the barn roof, and let Mira paint a sign by the gate. Rabern's Rest. No grand opening, no speeches, just a place where broken things learn to breathe again. One evening, as fireflies blurred the line between sky and land, Mira found Lemuel in the tack room. "He's gone," she said, voice small. For a heartbeat, Lemuel's world tilted, until he followed her gaze to the pasture. Ghost stood at the far fence, nose pressed to the wind, staring at the distant hills. "Not gone," Lemuel said softly. "Just remembering." They found him there at dawn, still as stone, dew clinging to his mane. Lemuel approached, boots crunching frost. Ghost didn't turn, but his ear flicked, a language they'd both mastered. The horizon burned red, and in that silence, Lemuel saw it, Inz's face in the sunrise, Dahlia's shadow in the trees, James's lies buried under 12 years of rust and rain. He laid a hand on Ghost's withers. "Go on," he murmured. "Show me." The horse hesitated, then surged forward, not the stiff trot of old, but a gallop that tore at the earth, mane streaming like a banner. Lemuel's breath caught. Ghost raced along the fence line, past the graves and the wild flowers and the bench with its chipped blue paint, faster, freer, until he skidded to a halt at the ridge, chest heaving, eyes blazing. Alive, alive. Mira appeared beside Lemuel, tears streaking her cheeks. "He's saying goodbye," she whispered. Lemuel shook his head. "No. He's saying look." They buried Inz's letter that afternoon, not in anger but in release, the paper crumbling into the soil where the wild flowers grew thickest. Ghost circled the spot once, then lowered his head, muzzle brushing the earth. When he lifted it, a butterfly clung to his forelock, orange and black, fragile as a heartbeat. Mira gasped. Lemuel didn't speak. Some truths didn't need words. Years later, when travelers asked about the old man and the horse who healed 1,000 broken things, the locals would smile. "They're still here," they'd say, pointing to the fields where the flowers never faded, where the wind carried the scent of fresh-cut hay and distant rain. And if you listened closely, you might hear it. The echo of hooves, steady and sure, a rhythm older than regret, softer than goodbye. Lemuel's hair turned white. Ghost's scars turned silver, and the ranch. It became a hymn, one verse ending, another beginning, all of them bound by the quiet truth that even the deepest wounds leave room for light. The last time Mira visited, she brought her own daughter. The child reached for Ghost's muzzle, unafraid. The old horse exhaled, warm breath fogging her tiny palms, and leaned in. Lemuel, watching from the porch, felt the old ache rise, not of loss but of love that had outlived every fire. That night, as stars pricked the sky, he slipped into the pasture. Ghost stood waiting, head bowed. Lemuel pressed his forehead to the horses, the way he had a lifetime ago in the mud and the rain. No words, just a breath, shared. When the sun rose, they were gone, not vanished, but woven into the dawn, two shadows dissolving into gold. The wild flowers nodded, the wind carried on, and somewhere beyond the hills, a new story began.